Well, hello from a parking lot with funny, blotchy sunlight. I'm trying to use this to make it a little bit better. I don't really know what's that really only impacts my neck, huh? Oh well. But it might start storming at any minute. Things are a little bit crazy right now, so we are going with it. Today is a fantastic passage from Genesis or from John 8. You may know the G.K. Chesterton line about this one. It's when Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am." And what Chesterton does when he talks about this is he tries to get us to understand just what it might have meant to look backward or to look forwards from that point to say, wait a minute, here's this man. Nobody's ever met him before. Nobody's ever claimed to be God before. And yet he's telling us that he existed before Abraham did. Like, are you actually crazy? Because it doesn't make any sense to say something like that. And Chesterton says, you can look it up if you want to. If you search for Chesterton and then in quotes, "Before Abraham was, I am," I think you'll find it. But Chesterton says, we have to understand that this would have been a scandalous and shocking thing for Jesus to have said. It would be better for us to expect the grass to wither and the birds to fall dead out of the air than to stand stupidly by debating fine shades of pantheism. When a passing carpenter said calmly, almost carelessly, like one looking over his shoulder, "Before Abraham was, I am," he says, we're so used to this idea. We're like, oh yeah, Jesus existed before God, or before Abraham, before creation, before whatever. And we don't realize that the people who rejected Jesus were in many ways justified in what they did, because he seemed like something special, but he didn't seem like who he truly was. And that's what I really want to focus on in today's readings. The first one, of course, is Abraham, right? Where God calls Abram. Abram prostrates himself, and God continued to speak to him. "My covenant with you is this: you are to become the father of a host of nations. No longer shall you be called Abram. Your name shall be Abraham." Right? And he goes on and says, "No longer shall your wife Sarai be called Sarai. Her name shall be Sarah." And this is really interesting because Abram and Abraham mean the same thing. And Sarai and Sarah mean the same thing. And God makes his promise that he's going to be the father of a multitude of nations. And you know what happens? Nothing. Nothing. There's no apparent change. And I think that this is something important for us to recognize in our own Christian lives, that we may have a profound encounter with God. Maybe you went on some retreat or you were in adoration one day, you had this amazing confession. You're like, oh my gosh, like everything is new, everything is different. I'm going to do this. But you go back to your life and it's just your regular life, and you feel dramatically different, but people don't necessarily see you as being any different. And it's that difficult spot to be in where you're like, okay, I know that I'm called to be something incredible for the Lord, but my parents don't see that, or my spouse doesn't see that, my coworkers don't see that. They just see like everything that I was before with like a little bit of Jesus on top. And it can be very discouraging when the radical change doesn't happen. Not only discouraging because the people who you love don't see it, but discouraging it because you don't see it. Here I am, I've had this radical encounter, I'm ready to be a saint, and yet I'm still so ticked off at everybody about everything. I've been praying recently. People often ask me like, well, how can I forgive? And I'm like, well, I can give you a lot of theoretical answers to that, but practically I'm terrible at it, and nothing bad has really ever happened to me. But I look at people and I see that one offhand comment that they made to me 5 years ago that hurt me so much. Or I see the way that they didn't do X, Y, and Z when I asked them to, or when I didn't ask them to, right? I see people as the way they have slighted me and not as objects of Christ's love. And I have been doing this Jesus thing hard for like 20 years. I've been doing it hard and also like educated and surrounded by a community that was encouraging me and calling me out for like 15, like there's no excuse for me not to be a saint at this point. And yet I'm not. And I mean, I'm just guessing here, but you're probably not either. And at a certain point, you're just like, you know what? Like, God told me I had a new name, and he told me I had a new purpose. He told me he was going to make me the father of a multitude of nations. And you know what has happened? 0 things. Actually, nothing. I'm the same person that I ever was. And we want to get discouraged by that. And often we want to give up, or maybe we want to go too hard. Be like, okay, well, I'm going to do 14 holy hours a day. Watch me go, which is maybe a little bit my inclination. But we have to recognize that God is at work even when we don't see him at work. That God is moving even when it's slow, even when he's just paving the way for us to be the people he's calling us to be. And we have to be willing to take those small steps to say, okay, no, like, I'm not who I should be, but in this relationship, I can love more. No, I'm not patient like I could be, but when I go to the grocery store, I can pray before I go in, and I can ask the Lord for the grace to love him in the grocery store. I'm not who I should be, but I can take these small steps so that the Lord can continue working in my heart to make me somebody new. Because if Abram, after 6 months, or 12 hours like many of us, or 10 years, if Abram had been like, you know what, like, it's not happening. Like, God hasn't made Sarah the mother of anybody. And, I'm a father, but only through this, like, distorted understanding of marriage and of family. And my life isn't any different from what it is. If he had quit, well, God knows what he would have done. Maybe he would have made a new covenant and made a new nation, and maybe not. But we're so prone to discouragement when we don't see the change happening in the way that it ought to happen. And this is the thing, like, we look at the Stations of the Cross, Jesus didn't fall once. He fell 3 times. Maybe he fell more than that, but in the Stations, we have 3 times that Jesus fell to remind us that we're going to mess up. And that doesn't mean that God's grace is finished. That means that we're being called deeper and deeper and deeper. And the way that you become a saint isn't by, like, snapping your fingers and, like, everything's great now, but it's by letting God work on you over and over and over again. I wrote about a saint today on Alatea, Blessed Anthony Neyrot, who was just a kind of a jerk of a priest. He was super arrogant and really willful and didn't really care about his vow of obedience as a Dominican, just kind of, like, did what he wanted. And the way that God saved him was actually through being captured by pirates, sold into slavery, and then apostatizing. He denied the faith, became a Muslim, married a woman as a Dominican priest, started studying the Quran. That's what God needed. That fallenness, that brokenness, that's what God needed to turn him from kind of a worthless priest into a saint. Now, I'm not suggesting apostasy as an approach to coming to know the Lord better, but I am saying that if we are doing our part, if we're living lives of daily silent prayer, if we're going to confession regularly, if we're receiving the sacrament of the Eucharist regularly, then we don't need to be discouraged by our lack of progress, because God is the one who is working in us. Now, Jesus says to the Jews, because they say, "Are you greater than our father Abraham who died?" He said, "Abraham, your father, rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad." And these people are like, you are actually crazy, right? Obviously, Abraham didn't see your day. And wait, you're telling us that you've seen Abraham before Abraham came to be? I am, right? The divine name. They picked up stones to throw at him. I mean, this is the way that the people react to Jesus, because they can't see beyond what's right in front of their eyes. And we need to recognize that in ourselves, that we can't necessarily see all the work that God is doing, but we also need to recognize that there are people who are going to look at us and just see the ugly and just see the stupid. And our job isn't to be like, "Oh, excuse me, like, I don't think you know from holy, like, I am holy and I've been following the Lord and look at how I pray." our job is to love them in that and to say, you're right. I got an email one time from somebody, some stranger, who said, oh, something like, you are the most arrogant and self-centered person I have ever encountered. And I have lots of feelings and I care a lot what people think about me. And so I freaked out for a little while and was like, I'm the worst. Everybody hates me. I should just quit everything and not bother with any of this again. And then I was like, you know what? Like, if I'm the most arrogant and self-obsessed person you've ever met, you're really living a sheltered life. Because, I am arrogant and self-obsessed, but like, man, oh man, I've met some people, I tell you what. And, I thought about how I could like just cave to that and hate myself, or how I could like defend myself. And finally I was just like, you know what? Like, he's not completely right, but in a sense he is right. And so I wrote back and I said, you're right. I am arrogant and self-obsessed. Please pray for me. And it did not turn into anything beautiful. He wrote back with some more rude things, but it was good for me to recognize, like, when people hate me, sometimes it's because they're crazy and mean, but usually it's a reflection of something that's true. And I can either react against that, or I can like totally absorb and accept that. These two extremes, one where it's just pure arrogance and one where it's pure self-loathing. Or I can say, okay, I am not all of the things that you say that I am, or at least not only the things that you say that I am, but I am some of those things. So I need to accept this and say, you know what? Yeah, I am arrogant and I am self-obsessed and I'm come across that way, and that may damage the gospel. But if I can recognize the ways in which that's true and ask the Lord to heal that and focus on particular issues instead of just being overwhelmed by like, oh yeah, I'm the worst, but say, okay, like, in this way, in these conversations, when this kind of thing happens, I make it about me. Like, how can I make it about Christ and how can I make it about others? The devil loves to work in these like sweeping large statements, in like massive discouragement, in total pride. But the Lord is in the small things and the gradations and the practical, right? The Lord says, you are amazing and also a complete disaster. But let's look at specifically how you can embrace the amazing that I've made you, and specifically how you, with my grace, can fight the disaster, right? Instead of just saying like, God said I'm Abraham, but all I am is Abram, right? Or like, deep down, I'm before Abraham was I am, and all anybody sees is Jesus. Instead, let's say, okay, like, there is truth to the fact that I'm not where I should be. And there is truth to that old line, right? I'm not who I should be, but thank God I'm not who I was. There is truth in both of those. But I live in the middle, right? Both gloriously, beautifully, wonderfully made, and a sinner who daily turns my back on my Savior. But here I am in the middle. Practically, what can I do? What active resolutions can I make? And Lent is coming to a close, but you can make Easter resolutions, and you can make ordinary time resolutions, and you can make birthday resolutions, and you can make Thanksgiving resolutions, right? These little things to say maybe for 6 weeks. I'm going to try this, or just today, or in this relationship, or in this setting, or while reading this book, I'm going to try this. And see if God isn't very gradually making it evident to the world that He has given us a new name and made us a new creation.